You are listening to the Bail Post. Welcome to this week's episode of the Bail Post, and today we're going to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit, and we're going to talk about a little bit about how the sausage is made, maybe. Our guests today are our PR team, Cara Downs and Elliott Chang. Welcome to being in front of the camera instead of behind the camera for today's episode.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Ken.
Elliott, talk about, how long have you been doing PR?
I guess it's been about 30 years now, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Cara, how about you?
About 20.
Wow. So how long have y'all been together as the Media Vista PR?
That would be nearly 9 years.
9 years? And how did that come about? Elliott?
We worked together at a PR firm. Actually, Elliott facilitated hiring me at that PR firm, and we worked there together for 9 years. Elliott was there longer than I was.
Yeah, I left the firm, and the way it worked out, we were working with the bail industry at the time, and they liked the work that Cara and I did, and so I went out on my own, and Cara said, "Gee, let's team up." And so we formed Media Vista, and really based on hinging on our original bail client.
Well, okay. So let's talk about the way I have kind of looked at PR for a long time, which is kind of ironic since we have our PR committee and we meet weekly. But when we first started talking about doing PR, I just thought it was too difficult. It was like a scatter shot. You're shooting a shotgun and you're seeing what pellets will stick to the wall, and you can't measure your success because there's just being too much stuff being thrown at the wall. So, but let's talk about that. What has PR done for the bail industry and specifically for the professional bondsmen of Texas? Elliott, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, our number one goal is to put forth a positive image of the bail profession, and that actually harkens back to when Cara and I first started many years ago working with bail, because there is, I think most of your audience probably realizes and understands all too well that there's an unfairly negative image of the profession and the people involved in it. So at its core, that was what we were trying to do, what we were trying to accomplish. Put not only a positive spin on it, but the truth, which of course anybody who knows the bail profession knows all the positives that it does for our criminal justice system.
I would say today that no one tells our side of the story. And if we're not telling it, and like you said, our side's the truth, the important work that the bail industry does, the importance of getting people to go to court to get their cases finalized. And if you don't have us telling our story, then there's not going to be anybody telling that story. I mean, Cara, do you agree?
Absolutely. The media is going to find somebody to tell the story on your behalf, and it's not the truth.
Yeah, I remember early on, before we started doing PR, I attended a hearing, and it was in the O'Donnell, Harris County versus O'Donnell case, and so I was in there, and I was scared to death of what the judge was doing. I was very upset. I thought she was going the wrong direction. I thought she was deciding the law incorrectly, and so she did. And it became the most important case cited across the country on bail. The problem was it just kept getting reversed, and nobody was even, talking about that. And then the plaintiffs settled with the county, and the county gave them everything they wanted, and they started following this settlement agreement, and there still are to this day, and the attorney general is seeking to overturn that now. But the problem was the judge was wrong. Over time, I was proven correct. She was reversed 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 times. And they are now appealing again to the Fifth Circuit after the Fifth Circuit ruled that that case should have never been filed in the federal system. So, I mean, if we're not telling our story and the judge is getting it wrong and nobody else is telling our story, then, I mean, we're going to get killed with the negative press that always follows the bail industry. And it seems like, I've become a convert because we're the only ones there left to tell our story. And we have a very, very important story to tell. How do we do that? How do we facilitate getting the bail story out, Karen?
Well, the most important thing is to identify somebody who's good with the press, who interviews well, who can get all their talking points in succinctly. Oftentimes, if you are in front of a courthouse talking about a hearing, you have 3 minutes in front of that camera to get your point across. So that's very important, is to find somebody who's well-spoken and can get their points across.
Well, I think we have to identify someone within our group who can speak. And, if you can have more than one, that's great. But I think what you were talking about with talking points, I always call that a game. So every time we have an interview, we have what we want to get out, and we call that our talking points. And it's a real art sometimes to work those into the conversation when they're asking questions that really don't have anything to do with the talking points. But I think of an interview as, this is your assignment. Your assignment is to get these talking points out. And so, that can be difficult at times, can't it, Elliott?
It can be difficult, but it really begins with what we call the pitch. And the pitch is very simply, typically an email, but it can be a phone call. Back in the day, it could have been a fax. But it's what we present to media and explain to them why they should be covering this story, whatever it is. And so whatever it is that they may think, especially when you're talking about criminal justice issues and bail issues, a lot of times people have a preconceived notion of what the situation is, and it's our job to not to tell falsehoods, but to shape the story, shape the narrative, so that they understand that there's more to what's going on than what they think. And then that's when we plug into what you said about getting our talking points across. But it begins with the pitch, so that we have to make it compelling enough that they feel that it's worthy of news coverage.
Well, I always talk about, we have, we do a pitch, so we know what the topic is supposed to be, and we're there with our talking points that we want to get out. But sometimes that can be difficult, especially if we're in I guess what I would call enemy territory. It seems like anytime we're talking to certain news organizations, they have their own talking points they want to get out that are always very negative to the bail industry. And so sometimes that can be a fight. And you have to keep your cool. You can't lose your temper. And I don't think I'm always good at that. I think I've lost my temper several times. But you have to, it's kind of like riding a horse. You have to get in the battle. You have to learn what you do well, what you don't do well. And then you have to learn every time you have an experience. And sometimes you can be doing it for a year, or you can be doing it for years, and then you can have a negative experience because somebody comes in and does something that you haven't seen before. It seems like I had that happen several times recently. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes they know they're not getting under your skin, and so they'll try to get under your skin. And, I've done a couple of debates that ended up like that. But just because something goes badly doesn't mean you can't learn from it. Don't you agree, Karen?
Absolutely, yeah. That's true. It probably helps that you're an attorney, though, because you were trained to argue, and you seem to like it. So probably it's a little fun for you.
Well, I don't know if I think it's fun. I think it's work, but I'm not scared of it. And I think probably I'd be better at it if I was a little bit more scared about it. But I do think, it's a learned thing. I mean, I wasn't very confident speaking in front of groups when I was very young. And so it's one of those things that it can be a learned trait And so it's kind of like the battle by fire. You learn what didn't work, and then you do it again. Then you learn what didn't work, and then you learn what did work, and then you start doing that. But you also, I always think when you go in there and you are tested, you broaden your area because every time we do a different pitch, then you now have that knowledge because you had to get ready. To me, the biggest problem is like if you go to the legislature and you're testifying on an issue, and then somebody decides to ask you a question that's out in left field, which maybe they don't know, or maybe they're trying to take you off your topics, and that's really difficult because I think that's the hardest thing I've seen from our organization is when you get there and you're under fire and somebody starts asking you questions, your natural inclination is to defend yourself, but what you have to do is redirect it back to your talking points because that's what you're there for. And that's a real art, isn't it, Elliott?
It is, but what you said a moment ago is really critical. When you go into interviews, especially the negative ones, that's how you hone your talking points, how you hone your craft, as it were. You only get it's a lot like sports. Nobody wants to get into the batter's box to face a 100-mile-an-hour pitch, but you're never going to get better unless you really face the best competition. The best competition in this context are all the naysayers who are attacking our positions within the bail industry, and you only get good at it by facing the slings and arrows, and that's how you get good, and that's where you excel, obviously.
Well, I think, it's one thing to be going to sources that we would consider like-minded, conservative sites, especially with the things that's happened as we've started doing PR. And, we started doing PR at a time when nobody was reporting anything positively about the bail industry or about the private industry bail system in general for the criminal justice reform. It was just kind of taken as granted that, if we could figure out a replacement, that would be okay. And then we started seeing all the negative consequences about that. And then New York decides to do bail reform, and it's just an abject failure. And so suddenly it's the number one topic that a lot of people are talking about. And it's kind of continued there in a lot of ways ever since. I mean, how do y'all see how discussing or talking about criminal justice reform has changed over time, especially from the ability to get stories, people to talk about it, get people, press wanting to interview our people? Elliott, you start.
Well, I think it's most effective when you have people who have been negatively affected by bail reform. That's certainly something that's escalated over time. Everybody has especially those who are not for what we do, not for the bail industry. As you said, there's a narrative that they have in their minds. But when you start bringing out actual case studies of people who have been negatively affected by it, it really does change the narrative a lot.
Well, it seems like, Carol, this is one of the things we did early on. We did a video of the faces and the victims of bail reform. The faces were the people who were benefiting from bail reform, and then we had another slideshow with them and their victims of it's kind of like they were given grace, and so they use that to victimize a new person. And there's some of those people that are still in the news today that we highlighted years ago.
Well, it's important for us as publicists to monitor the news every day and see stories of just like you were talking about, and then we discussed it amongst the group. And oftentimes it's part of a pitch. It becomes part of a pitch because producers and reporters, they want something that is recent. They want to talk about things that have just affected public safety, and you can certainly speak to that.
Well, I think that's a good point because we have our talking points about how, general, if you want victims to have their day in court more quickly, then you want to use the private bail system because it's the one that has the lowest failure to appear rate. And that's not even really disputed except for people who can't be honest about the facts. And so we have a series of talking points that you kind of can overlay into any given fact situation. So when you're talking about the poor woman from Ukraine that was killed on a subway, then suddenly, and you're talking about his criminal history, and it just falls right into what we've been talking about for years, doesn't it, Elliot?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a very common preconceived notion that the victims of bail reform are, it's the guy who winds up sitting in jail for 6 months because he, shoplifted $2 worth of goods. But that's really not where, that's really, they are not the true victims. The true victims are people, like you said, like the poor Ukrainian woman in North Carolina. And unfortunately, that's only the tip of the iceberg. There's unfortunately there's countless numbers of people who've been I mean, they've been killed. I mean, let's just call it the way it is. They've been murdered because of bail reform,
Well,
and
yeah, that's a
and
good
and
point.
based
I
on crime
mean,
laws.
we have a lot of people that would say we're just not we're inhumane because we need to release more people from jail, and we ignore the fact that releasing more people from jail will cause more crime. But before let's talk about from the getting the message out. I mean, what kind of progression do you have to go through from okay, you've got 3 minutes of talking points, or you've got talking points with 3 minutes to talk, versus what do you have to go through to be able to go all the way to engage in a debate with somebody from the opposing side and have an hour and a half long debate with them? I mean, it seems like you're going to have to be much better prepared for the
Oh yeah.
second one, Kara.
Yes, that's a whole other animal. Um, it helps if you have a background in debating, if you like it, and you're good at it. And it's I mean, you yourself have done countless podcast interviews, and they're an hour long. And then when you get a radio interview and it's 3 minutes long, it feels like a surprise to you now. Maybe it's even easier now.
Well, I think I think going through the fire, because the level of preparation that you have, because our friends on the other side, as I like to call them, you have to be polite to them. You have to be, and I'm not always, but you have to be polite, and you have to be very well prepared, and you have to be able to show when people are not being honest with the facts. I just think of the time that we had an article in the Dallas Morning News, and they had lost an appeal, and but there was a quote in the article from one of the trial attorneys saying that uh, every trial court across the country had agreed with them on the merits every time to hold that the private bail system was unconstitutional. But what they left out was, and every time it went to the Court of Appeals, it was reversed. And so we did a very targeted letter to the editor to point that out. And it was probably our first letter to the editor to be published. Elliot, talk about that.
Well, I think that it's really important to understand that from a PR standpoint, that we're always thinking about getting our message across, or there's a debate about bail reform. But I think what a lot of people fail to understand is that the omission of facts can
Mm-hmm.
also be very much a form of advocacy or bad journalism, depending on how you want to look at it. If you have a major news outlet that's supposed to be covering the facts, but they leave out half the story, which is the side of the bail industry, and yet they can say, no, everything we reported in the story is true. Well, that may be so, but omitting half of what happened, well, that's not. And not only is that not good journalism, that doesn't serve society. That doesn't serve the mandate of what journalism is supposed to be about. It just isn't.
Well, it seems like it's what the one thing we've had difficulty getting published, and we've had a lot of success. I don't know of any article that we've ever written that hasn't been published, especially under this climate that we have now. But it's very difficult to have letters to the editor published because it seems like those are the most difficult people, or those outlets seem to be lined up against us, and they can ignore us by and not tell our side of the story in their article. And if they don't print a letter to the editor, then they can pretty much prevent the other side's view, which is our side's view, from even getting out to their readers. And sometimes it's very difficult for us to understand why they won't listen to us. And I mean, talk about that, Cara. Why do you think it's so difficult in some of the newspapers to catch on?
It could be preconceived notion of what they might want to report. We've had occasions where we provided a statement, and it was a rather long statement. This one in particular I'm thinking of, and what was printed was half the statement.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you took half the statement, it looked like the subject was agreeing with what they wanted to report. But what happened was they cut off a paragraph that was it was talking about a study that proves the first sentence in the statement wrong. They left that out.
Well, I like to be nice to. I mean, I like to be nice to everybody. It's, when they're asking for quotes and stuff. But I don't have. I probably need to be a little bit nicer at times because I don't have a problem calling reporters out if we have a track record with them. I'll still talk to them, but I will say, we don't have a really good track record with y'all. Y'all don't report honestly, and so why should I give you a quote? Or if I'm helping them on background understand something, and I'm like, I'm helping you understand this. So, in the future, are you going to be more more fair in the news? And what I find is those reporters that call me, especially from newspaper outlets, the one of them will say, "Well, that wasn't me that wrote that article," and I'm like, "Yeah, I still." I have a stink for the whole organization, for the whole newspaper, because you're not being honest, and that's difficult at times. But let's kind of talk about something else. We've had a lot of success, and I think when we started, we did not think we would have very much success in getting articles published because we had a group, what we call them, the grassroots group, that had been doing some PR for a year or two, and they had not had any success in having articles published. I mean, let's start with how many articles do y'all have an idea how many articles we've had published? Either one of you?
I think we counted them recently. Was it 30?
Yeah, I think it was around.
Okay.
30, yeah.
So we've had 30 articles published, and we had a time where we couldn't get anything published. What changed, Elliott?
Well, it's like a lot of things in life. Once you establish yourself, and in this case, we're talking about you because you are principally the author of these articles. Not always, but once you're published, and you have now been published again, 30 or more times, then you begin to build a reputation for yourself. Yes, it's true. You're an attorney. You are on the board of the PBT, but you may not have had a track record for publication. But once you get one article published and it's well written, it becomes much easier the second time, and the third time, and so forth. And such to the point, in fact, I'd like to defer to Cara on this one because Cara established a really good relationship with one of the top legal publications in the nation.
So, and so recently, you've been published many times in this publication, but recently the editor reached out to us and said, we're putting together an article about bail reform. We'd like Ken to submit a piece about whatever he'd like to write about. So that was a huge win.
Well, I would add to that. I don't think the fact that I'm an attorney makes me able to have articles published. I think there's a knack to writing. Some people have it, some people don't. So you've got to find somebody in your group that likes to write or is able to write. And I think I know a lot of attorneys that can't write, but I've always liked to write. Even when I was in law school, I feel like I'm bragging. I was on some national teams in our brief was selected in, the best in the nation for a national competition. And so I've always liked writing. There was a time when I would have said that I was going to be a writer, but my brother decided that that was the worst thing that could have ever done, and he was telling me how awful I was, and so I decided I didn't want to be a writer because I didn't want to be a bad person like he said I would be if I was a writer. But I've always liked writing. I think a lot of attorneys have books that are in them that they could write, and I feel like I could write some books. But I think you first got to identify someone who can write. But Cara, talk about, we've also identified, because of the person who writes, subjects that we know we can get published now.
Yes, that's true. You know what? I just want to point out that when you write something, you do have to gear it towards your audience. So it's different when you go to a legal publication than if you're going to go to a consumer publication like a daily paper. Or say you wanted to write an article to students, like you wanted to go do a student paper. It's all different, and you have to be able to curtail what your message is, how you're going to approach it. And also word length, because as we all know here, legal publications they'll say, 3,000 words, and then you're going to a daily paper and it's 300. So,
what I will say this, what we usually do is we identify a topic that we want to write about. And what we've had a lot of success about is identifying a new case that has come out from the appellate courts. And so it's always easy to talk about that and write an article summarizing what the appellate court did on the bail issue, and then submitting that for the either Law 360 or Attorney at Law magazine. And we've had a lot of success doing that. And we've had a lot of success just writing on bail reform. And I think that's what we did originally. But the process that we go through is, we select the topic, we decide the word count, and then I'll do the initial draft, and then we'll put it through the editing process. Elliott, talk about that.
The editing process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we just basically clean up the work that you start with. I mean, a good editor really leaves the original work alone, and that presumes, and maybe it's a big presumption, that the original writer has something to say. Now, that may go without saying, except there's an awful lot of writers out there who don't really have much to say. They want to be published. They may have one or two things they want to say, but that's not enough for an article.
We do have this one person that we have edited their articles before, and we make jokes about it. And so we talk about how we got to take the hate out of their writing, and it's not, so there are definite styles. And I think one of the things that y'all are really good at is taking the initial draft and then say, well, maybe this needs to be cleaned up. Maybe we need to change this for the audience, or maybe we need to focus on this. But again, as long as we're staying within our word count, it's just really cleanup. And we've gotten really good, and we can probably get an article from start to finish, me submitting it to y'all, probably within 3 or 4 days now.
Yes. Oh, I just wanted to add, just real quickly, a lot of writers, when they're putting together an article, they have a tendency to make their point at the wrong part of the article. Mm-hmm. Elliott likes to talk about the inverted triangle. Elliott, you want to touch base on that?
That's sort of, I think that anybody who took a journalism class knows the inverted pyramid, which is you start with the most important things at the top, and then it goes down from there. And the presumption is, at least in journalism, like back in the days of newspapers and all that, is that you're losing your audience with every sentence that you write, because they're just going to lose interest and they're going to stop reading. So therefore, if you bury the most important stuff at the bottom, they'll never have read it.
Which some people tend to do. And a lot of times you'll look at the first draft and you'll see, that last paragraph should really be the top paragraph.
Or from our industry, you'll see a concession that's favorable to the bail industry, but it's stuck at the end, and so nobody gets that far in the article.
Uh-huh.
And that may well be intentional too, of course. knowing.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
well,
so we talked about writing articles and we talked about, we've had a lot of success in doing that, but something that's really kind of come out up since we started PR, and that's really the growth of podcasts. Not only did we create our own podcast, but we've been on numerous podcasts. And I don't even think we highlight that as much. I mean, we have a library of all those. And I think the great advantage of doing podcasts is it hones your skills on being able to talk to people and to make your point. And so it's kind of like a training ground for people. And so like bondsmen who want to talk about what they do, I mean, that's a great training grounds then to add a few talking points into the discussion about this is what we do and this is why it's so important and this is why it's so helpful to the criminal justice system. And I mean, talk about how the landscape has changed over time with the growth of podcast, Elliot.
sure. I mean, for the longest time, I mean, the holy grail, at least for those of us in working with hard news subjects like bail, would be radio, because radio is considered a serious format, talk radio, all news radio. But as most of us are aware, the landscape has certainly changed. But that's not to say that radio is dead. A lot of people think that it is, but what actually has happened is that radio has turned into podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it's actually better now than ever before because, as Cara mentioned earlier, with radio, you might get a 3 or 5 minute interview. With podcasting, you typically get an hour-long interview. So you can really do a much deeper dive into subjects. And more often than not, you have an audience that really cares about what it is that you're talking about. So,
Well, and to do an hour, you've got to be prepared. You've got to know the material and your industry. And I always say, who knows that better than bondsmen? I mean, nobody knows what you do better than I mean, especially when we've got second and third generation bondsmen that are now taking over their family business. I mean, those should be great advocates for our industry, with the exception of, I always say this, when we have a room full of bondsmen, we have a room full of hot air at times. So we've got to identify the people who can be good spokesmen for us and then get them out there and get them doing podcasts because that's a great training ground. Don't you think, Carol?
Yes, and I was just going to say that for an hour-long podcast, sometimes you might cover other things. So you'll learn that a bail agent, say they put together something for their community, a charity event, or a bake sale, to anything that they do for the community. Maybe they are they're the coach for their kids' little league, and they humanize them because people have this perception of bail agents that they're all gruff and what they see in the movies, and that's not who they are. They're just people doing work for their community and supporting their families and caring about public safety.
Well, and I think also with that extra time, you've got to not be afraid to kind of take over the podcast if you need to, if they're trying to shift the subject into to an area that you can perceive as an attack on the industry, or just an attack in general. I mean, I've been on a podcast recently where we were doing a pitch that tied into something Trump was doing, and it was a really good pitch, but the podcaster wanted to pivot into attacking Trump almost, I mean, it was crazy. Now, what I should have done was say, well, I'm not really here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about what Trump's done with his executive order from the standpoint of criminal justice reform. And so we should focus on that. And here's why. But I took the bait, and I mean, I ended up saying, you really hate Trump. I mean, can you say he's done anything right? I mean, can you give him any compliment whatsoever? And so it really kind of became a little bit personal, when that's what we don't want. I mean, we're not doing podcasts to piss people off unless it's a debate where we are taking a specific position and we're responding to their position. And so I really kind of felt like that was an example of where I didn't do my best job, and that's really kind of recent. And so it's just an example of, you're always going to learn. You're always going to learn from every experience, and as long as you're getting better and you're able to use that experience for the next one. Because I think a couple of podcasts later, I had that same thing happen again, and I was able to say, that's really not why I'm here. We could have another whole episode where we spent an hour just talking on that subject, but I don't think that's a really good use of our time, because I'm here to talk about the importance of criminal justice reform, which is so important to victims, especially in our urban areas. And so I really regret the the rabbit hole we went down. But I'm at the point where I don't think we can get to the point where we can identify that without going through kind of basic training, or going through becoming a Marine for the bail industry. We have to make mistakes, and we have to learn from them, and we have to put ourselves out there. So we have to identify that person, and then we have to get them out there. And then you got to kind of have a thick skin when your friends are telling you what a terrible job you did, and you just need to get better.
Well, it's interesting you bring up politics. Politics. I just want to say that if you watch a good politician, they will skillfully change the subject about and talk about what they wanted to get across. Like, they'll ask them, "What did you think about the recent bill that so and so signed?" And then they'll say, "Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because energy prices," and then they're there because that's what they were there to talk about. They just pivot, and they know how to do it, and they do it very skillfully.
Well, and I think that's difficult for us at times, because this is something that we all take very personally. And I think that this is an issue that is overly politicized right now, where the people on the other side are not being honest, I think, about what works and what doesn't work. And I think they may even be being held hostage, because their supporters will never agree with them that it's not working. And so they have to carry on. And it's really hard at times. Like, I like to refer to these as our friends on the other side, but there's a lot of people that wouldn't refer to them as friends. And I'm like, well, we're all part of a bigger thing. And so we're all friends. We just have a disagreement on here, and we have some very big disagreements because things are not working, and y'all won't even admit they're not working. And I would say that some of you on that side probably are just not being honest about the statistics. And so it's, people have asked me many times, what's the compromise? And I'm like, I don't know if you can compromise people that won't even admit there's a problem. I mean, if they won't even admit crime is going up, and how do you find a compromise? And so, but saying all that, and here's my point: you can be antagonistic during an interview to the point where people quit listening to you, and so you can make your points and people quit listening. And so that's why you've got to be, like you said, you've got to be nice, you've got to be polite as much as you can, and you've got to make your points and make them in an intelligent fashion. Because if you get on there and you're angry, you got a chip on your shoulder, then that's all that everybody remembers. And that hurts your cause, not helps your cause. And if that's the spokesman you're going to have, then you're hurting your industry. Right, Karen? I mean, Elliot, I'm sorry.
That's true, and that, by the way, is one reason why it's always great if you can, not great, but it's positive if you can work with either victims or the families of victims, because as terrible as whatever it is that they have gone through, these people typically, they really don't care about the politics. They only care about what happened to them or what happened to their family member, and they just want it fixed, or they want the loss of life of their loved one to have some kind of meaning, and they really don't care about the politics at all.
Well, and we don't pitch it as a partisan issue, because it shouldn't be.
Well, okay, so it seems like we have more success at times when we identify partners, coalition partners, people who are like-minded to our position, and then we approach them about offering them up to give an interview, because they don't end up getting these personal attacks. And then, if they're really good at it, which we've identified several that really are from law enforcement, we'll mention a couple of talking points to them, that are favorable to us, and we're just kind of seeing if they'll do it. And the ones that are really, really good tell our story, and then they don't get attacked like we would if we were there telling it. Talk about that a little bit, Elliot.
Sure. I mean, again, it's because they care, They really transcend whatever it is that the, the, the host of a podcast or reporter, uh, whatever agenda they may have. Because if you're, let's say, you're a police chief or a police officer or a victim's right advocate, that's all you really care about. And so, uh, in a certain sense, you become impervious to any kind of attacks. And not only that, but again, that's really not why they're there. They're there to get there. If you're a police officer, you're there because you want to be able to do your job and you want to be able to protect the public. That's it. You're not there to
But
to
when we do it, Kara, we've identified an overlap in our story and their story, and we're seeing if they'll let us offer them to tell their story, and we hope it falls in the overlap, right?
Exactly. Yes. And also, it's just they like Elliot said, they're there to tell their story. If they're a victim's family member, they're not going to be peppered with questions about laws
Hmm.
or statistics. They're going to be respected, and the host is going to let them tell their story. They might have a third party there. They might have a police officer there as a second guest to talk about other things, but they're not going to pepper the victim's family member with questions like that.
Or even law enforcement. The chief
Yeah.
deputy of a law enforcement agency that was at the crime
Oh,
scene,
yeah.
and so he knows exactly what happened. And he feels it very deeply. They're not going to attack him as having an incentive on wanting, the private bail industry to be used more. And so, I mean, when it's just a much more powerful message when it comes out from somebody who is like-minded, but doesn't come from the bail industry.
Yes. It doesn't seem to have any agenda.
Well, that's true. Okay, so we talked about writing articles, we've talked about podcasts, we've talked about identifying issues, and then we do interviews. We do some interviews as well, but we've done a lot more podcasts recently, and it seems like what I've seen when people prepare for me on an interview now, they go to our own library of podcasts that we've done or that we've appeared on, and if they really want to get prepared, they'll bring up things that I've said on podcasts. And so, I mean, I would say, well, shoot, I'm kind of embarrassed because I have the same talking points mostly, and I could cite some of them wrote without asleep, but I take that as a compliment when somebody says they've been on our website and they look through a lot of our interviews, and they've come prepared for Bear to ask questions. I like that a lot. I mean, to me, it tells me they're prepared, and so I need to be on my A game. I mean, don't you agree, Elliot?
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things that we're always looking for is our storylines, whatever's newsworthy, and whatever we can peg to that. It's not always bail is not always in the news, at least at the forefront. I mean, it's always there because it's part of the criminal justice system, of course. But there are times like with the murder of the Ukrainian woman where it just reaches the top of the charts, so to speak, or when President Trump issued his executive order. But a lot of times it doesn't reach that level, and so we definitely try to
Well, but
find
we've
things
already
that are
talked about
relevant.
how we are always reviewing the news and identifying stories. So we're always out looking at what is in the news. And so we're identifying and we're passing around amongst ourselves the criminal justice bail reform related stories, or even the bail failure stories. And then we're meeting once a week to identify what can we do with that. And I like to say, how can we get in the news playing off of something that Trump has done? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't, like the time that somebody wanted to attack Trump for an hour, which made it very difficult for us to get out our story. But there are a lot of things in the news now that are pretty much criminal justice reform, bail reform failures, and it gives us a lot of opportunities now to talk about things that we historically have been trying to talk about without as much success. Kara, why is that? Do you think we've gotten better at it? Do you think it's all news related? Do you think it's just because of timing? or why are we having so much success?
Well, I think it's like you said, you have so many podcast interviews out there that when we pitch, it's quite possible that people will then, the hosts or producers or whomever will look you up and see, oh, he's done all these interviews. Let me listen to a few. Hey, he's good. Let's book him.
Well, but I would say we had a dry spell for a while, and then we started having success. We've always gotten all of our articles that we've written published, but we've had. It was slow coming, or do you think it was? So we had to be patient at the beginning. Don't you agree, Elliot?
I really do think that it has to tie into the news cycle. It just does. So that I know we keep emphasizing that, but it's difficult to make something an issue when the public at large, or more importantly, news directors and reporters don't think it's an issue. Now we may claim all we want that no, this really is a big deal, and that is part of our job is to maybe take things that they were not aware of, and magnify it, emphasize it enough so that they understand that it's important. But that can only take you so far. The story isn't really that big relative to other things going on in the news. Well, you can only go so far with it.
Well, the initial horrible murder of the Ukrainian woman in North Carolina, that was the story right then, and then the law that they created, Arena's law, afterward, that became another wave of interviews.
Well, and also another wave was his criminal history became a wave too.
Yeah.
So you've got the initial incident, his criminal history, and then his mental history, and then Arena's law and how quickly that passed. The governor didn't want to sign it because he's a Democrat, but then he decided he could not sign it. So all those different things are different opportunities to try to get into the news.
And you'll see if you go back and see when your interviews were, you could probably see them in clusters because of the different waves of information coming out and different opportunities to pitch the story.
Sometimes I don't know if I should bring this up or not, but it was definitely newsworthy, and that was the infamous poop attack on a New York subway.
Oh no. That did get you a lot of interviews.
Yeah, I know that was that. I don't think I need to elaborate. I think that one sentence said it all. But it got covered everywhere. Long before we tried to pitch that, we didn't need to pitch it. It was just out there. And so some things are horrific, like the murder of a person. Other things just kind of
grab your attention.
Well, and I do think that's true. We've gotten really good about identifying those attention-grabbing stories and trying to either build off of them, explain them better for the public to understand, or just ride the wave of this is an example of bad bail reform. Because if we weren't saying it was an example of bad bail reform, I'm not sure anybody would be. I think maybe more now, but when New York first passed its bail reform, and they rolled it back the first time, I don't think anybody, in New York from the legislature was thinking, oh, well, this is bad bail reform. Now they've rolled it back 3 times and it's still being talked about as for rolling it back a 4th time. And so we've been at the forefront of talking about these issues. I think we started doing PR after Prop 47 in California, when all of the right-wing groups got in line and said, this is a great thing because these people are going to be able to find jobs. And then they decriminalized theft under $950 and they all ran from it. And we would have been able to predict that from the beginning. It just those examples of we're seeing things we would have never seen in the news, because I think with y'all reviewing the news and we start reviewing the news, so we start sending articles around for our groups to look at. But when we're here in Texas, we stop looking outside of Texas. And then when today we go, well, what's going on in California? What's going on in New Jersey? They may be coming to Texas next. And so we need to learn. And so, I highlight that, we started a podcast. Well, we didn't start a podcast. We didn't know what a podcast even was when we started talking about starting one. And so we went through, I think, 6 months of researching what is a podcast. We even had little contests on our group about the artwork for our podcast. And I was like, well, I don't really want it to be artwork that I did because I want it to be someone else on the committee because then it's their own, they own it and it's their feeling like they're involved. And so, I mean, we had to learn, we had to figure out how to do it. We had to learn how to edit and what software. And then, I mean, even the music, I mean, it just became this really big thing for our committee because we were all didn't know what a podcast was. And then now you go forward 4 years and at times we're ranked in the top 10 of the criminal justice podcasts in the world. And we go, I laugh because I'm like, well, that's not a very big audience, but it's a very good achievement for our committee and for our group. And we've had, as Cara said, we've had a lot of luck with getting very good guests on our podcast, haven't we?
Yes. Can you think of some off the top of your head right now?
Well, the president cited the Yolo County studies in his executive order. We had uh,
Jeff Reisick?
yeah, Jeff Reisick, the DA that did those studies. We had him on our podcast. We did the podcast with Kim Ogg, the DA from Harris County, when she decides to disclose all about Soros in our podcast. And that was, we had suspicions about all that, but once she got defeated, she felt free about, yeah, everything you're thinking about them, what they do and what quid pro quo they do, they're doing. And I mean, it just goes on and on. And, we've just contacted some people and said, hey, we do a podcast and it's highly thought of for criminal justice issues. And we'd like to highlight your study. And those are some of my favorites when some people come on there and say, yeah, highlight my study that no one wants to talk about. And our friends on the other side are actually saying that the studies are showing the opposite of what my study actually shows. And so that's another example of, if we weren't telling the story of bail or the successes of bail, nobody would be telling it. And they would be telling the opposite story.
I
It's
think
kind of sad.
the sheer number and variety of guests that we've had on the podcast kind of speaks for itself, and in the same way in which I had said earlier that you begin to build on your own reputation. Both,
But isn't the lesson from our podcast is just don't be afraid to say no? I think y'all came up with the idea. Have we ever thought about starting a podcast? And so we were like, oh, it's a podcast. But we said, you know what? Let's research it. Let's look at it. And so we weren't afraid to take a chance and we just didn't say no. And that has enabled us to create this long library of articles to tell the story of bail in ways that they would have never been told. And we use those all the time at the legislative session. When somebody proposes a bill that's like the New Jersey plan and we're like, well, we've got we've got a podcast about that and we send it to all the staff. I mean, the elected officials don't have time, but their staffs have time to say, no, this is a terrible plan. It went bankrupt a couple of times in New Jersey. But
Although sometimes you'll have a guest on and the interview will be so interesting that you can write an article afterwards about it.
well, and I like to talk about synergies. So we'll get the idea from y'all will do a pitch. And then if it's a new pitch, then I have to get educated about it. When they're talking about Irina or the incident with the woman from Ukraine, and we talk about Irina's law, then I have to be educated or I have to learn myself or learn about the proposed bill and what passed. And so I have to learn about all the politics of that. And so then when I do that, then I'm really ready to go on podcasts to talk about that when I do an interview. And so it's the synergism, I think, is very, very good. We come up with the idea and then we educate ourselves and then we're experts on the issue and then we're able to talk about it. And it seems like recently I was on a podcast and they were like, well, are you prepared to talk about Irina's law? I'm like, well, sure I am. I can talk about it in detail. I can talk about what happened, Irina's law. I can talk about his criminal history because those are things that we've had to prepare for to do our own podcast about it.
there was one and that reminds me of, I think it was the interim director of the Minnesota Freedom Fund,
Mm-hmm.
the bail funds, and when he was interviewed about why he was letting all these people out, he said, "Oh, I don't even bother to look at the cases
Hmm.
because the important thing is to let these people out." And
Yeah.
of course, you wanted someone like an idiot, but no, you talk about someone who was not educated, who did not get himself up to speed, and he certainly hurt his cause by his ignorance.
Well, and that's a good point because when we did a podcast about charitable bail funds, um, our guest made the point that they're not really bonding out people that would come to us. They're bonding out the people that have burned all of their bridges. They've burned their families, they've burned their friends, and so they have no one left. So those are the career criminals. And those are the ones in those situations, or a lot of times, that are approaching the bail funds. So people that need to stay in jail because they've gone through all their friends and family and they're now career criminals, they need to stay there. Uh, but those charitable bail funds, when they were not doing any investigation, we discovered that that's who they were bailing out. And no wonder they were getting in trouble. They were getting in trouble because they didn't know anything about bail. They didn't know to look at criminal history. They didn't know. They're just like, hey, we got a weekend before we get arrested again, so let's go party. I mean, that was a hard lesson for them to learn. But also, there's a lot of other factors that play into that. But so let's talk about if we were going to if I had a group that was thinking about doing PR, um, what what is it that we can do, or what is it that a PR team can do for them uh, that they are not currently doing?
Well, there's probably a lot that they're not doing. Like we said initially, is to identify somebody who would be comfortable speaking on behalf of their profession, be comfortable on camera, be comfortable on an hour-long interview or a 5-minute interview, and then also somebody who could write, and we could go to their local media, their daily papers, if there are magazines anymore, and even websites in their area, and then try to get them published.
At the most fundamental level, it's what does APR, what does media relations, public relations do for any client? It raises their public perception through the use of media, and
Well,
so
some of the things that I've liked that we've done the most is highlight positive stories about bondsmen in the news. Like there's Kelvin Hampton from Houston, Texas, that does uh, a scooter giveaway every year for Christmas. There's Dusty Autry that does a big fireworks thing every year in Ellis County. And then, it just goes on and on. We have bondsmen in San Antonio that have created charities. And then we have bondsmen who doing their job when the police are searching house to house and they think that it's going to end up in a shootout, they make calls to the family, and in the end, they end up escorting the defendant into the jail without any incident. I mean, we did a podcast about that called Meet the Coopers, and it's one of our most listened to podcasts where you just highlight the positive things that bondsmen do for the community, whether that's a toy drive or whether it's just supporting people or whether it's their jobs, and then highlighting that in the news. And when you compare that and you do the Yolo County study that says, let's compare two people, one released on a simple release and another one released on a private surety bond, and they're both nonviolent offenses, and the one released on a simple release has a 200% greater chance of committing a new violent offense in the next 18 months. And I'm going to tell you, if I was a family member, I would never want my family member released ever on simple release. I mean, they've already wayward people who are, problem children. Just this type of release is going to create a situation where they are now much worse off than they were before, facing a silly mistake. Now they're facing a huge mistake. And if we weren't highlighting that and the studies like that, I mean, our friends on the other side are going to call us liars. Our friends are on the other side are going to say that we're misrepresenting. But for the people who are rational, the people that just want to find out what works and do more of that, they would never see that without our joint effort and our committee and our public relations team that is y'all. Um, and I think we do great work, and I think that we've learned a lot, and I can't believe how much more we have to learn. Closing
If I
thoughts,
may,
Cara, Elliott.
if I may, there was one. This is a long time ago, but it's always stuck with me. We were working with a bail agent out of Arizona, I think it was, and we were just talking with him to see if there was any relevant newsworthy hooks that he had of what he was doing as a bondsman. And then he told me this story that's always stuck with me. He said that there was this one fellow that he bailed out who was a Gulf War veteran who became addicted to prescription drugs, pain medication, because he had been injured in the war. And next thing you know, he was breaking into homes, and yeah, he was arrested. And so this bail agent had bailed him out. And so skipping forward, he said, like some years later, he ran into this guy. I mean, he had gone through the system, he had cleaned up, everything was resolved. He sees this guy like in a shopping mall one day, and this former Gulf War veteran throws his arms around him, and practically in tears, and says, "You saved my life." And he says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you know what? You checked on me every day. You made sure I was okay." He says, "Well, I was doing my job. I wanted to make sure you didn't skip." He goes, "No, nobody else cared the way you cared about me." And that was a genuine story. So those are the things that a lot of people just don't see. They just don't see it. But those are the stories that need to be told.
I've told this story so many times, but I have a sister who had a car accident in 1989. So I graduated from law school in May. I took the bar exam in July. I didn't find out I passed until November. And in October, she had a car accident. She broke every bone in her face. And she started a 30-year drug addiction to prescription painkillers. And I mean, I was a brand new attorney. I was poor as all get out. And the poor drug rehab at the time was you get them in jail. And I tried everything I could to get her in jail, to get her straightened out. And it didn't work. She was smart, even though she had a brain injury. She was still smart. And until late in life, after 30 years, it caught up with her, and I had her declared incompetent, and I put her in an assisted living facility where they managed her medications. And she probably had the best 5 years of her life at the end because she blossomed. She became the cruise director for the assisted living facility. She was checking on what she called her little old ladies, the ones that if they weren't able to walk their cat or their dog in the evening, she would go do it for them. And she went from asking me to approve her to get medications for painkillers to forgetting about it. Because, and I keep saying, our your best chance for that is not the criminal justice, it's family. And a lot of times it's the bail industry that's interacting with family. And when we do these simple release mechanisms, you're taking the family away, you're taking away their option to get their family's choice, their attention. And we're making their lives worse, not better. And nobody would be highlighting these stories but for y'all. And that's great work we do. That's great work we do for our industry. It's great defense for what we do because we do a great public service under attack at all times. So, all right. Well, that's it for this episode of The Bail Post. And Cara, Elliott, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and come back for the next episode of The Bail Post.